Hello, and welcome to Neuraquarium. Neuraquarium is a simulation where fish-like digital creatures with neural network brains are born, die, reproduce, and evolve. We can watch them adapt, modify their environment, and even edit their brains. In this video, we'll design an environment, set up a simulation with a few custom parameters, and then check in over 5 days of simulated time to see how our critters evolve. There will be speciation, specialization, predation, and mass extinctions. But let's start with the basics. I've set up a few different environments within this one level. If we turn on the temperature overlay, you can see how different these three zones are. On the left, I created a sort of standard, mild environment. A few scattered weeds here and there, but not very dense. Weeds produce nuts, a protein-rich plant food source, and also warm the water nearby. The little green food nuggets that float around and serve as the most basic source of food also provide a little extra nutrition when they're warm. So this will be a very mild environment with no extreme temperatures and high-value food. On the right, things are more extreme. Up top, a thick overgrowth of weeds means huge stores of nuts, but also temperatures hot enough to cook any critters that haven't evolved heat tolerance. And down below, we have a sort of sea bottom environment. It's freezing down here, but I've also placed several food dispensers. The frozen food nuggets will drift more slowly and be easier to catch, but provide less energy than food in warm water. Critters without cold adaptation will be slowed and lose energy if they linger here for too long, but a species that can tolerate the cold will have a steady and easily obtained, if low-value, supply of food. So theoretically, we have a stable environment where critters can evolve and thrive without too much trouble, and then a couple of more challenging areas where extremophiles may take root and be able to fill those niches without competition from other species. It'll be interesting to see if that bears out. Aside from the environment itself, we also have a lot of simulation settings we can tweak. I've boosted the mutation rate for critters' physical features to promote diversity, but we don't want brain mutations to go too high, or helpful behaviors won't be able to pass down through the generations. We'll tweak the food spawn rates and limits a little bit, and set up autosaves on a 30-minute interval. Since all of the critters that spawn are randomized, including their brains, the odds are that most of them will not be very good at, well, living. But eventually, random chance will produce a critter that's capable of surviving and reproducing. And reproduction plus mutation means evolution. So let's hit fast forward and see what happens. After about 10 hours, we have our first successful species evolve, Dicbictobnus rapidus. They're moderately sized, pastel-colored herbivores with a pinkish ventral strip. As the name implies, they have a high speed stat. They're pretty strong too, and they have a higher offspring investment, so they only lay 2 eggs at a time, but their babies emerge closer to maturity. In terms of behavior, they're pretty basic. They just sort of drift around in slow circles. We can occasionally see one biting things that get close, which might mean nutritious nuts, or might mean each other. Since these are herbivores, they wouldn't get much energy out of eating each other, although they would at least benefit from the protein. Sadly, Dicbictobnus rapidus does not survive. It's 8 more hours before life takes hold again, and this time it happens in the cold zone. Dinetus herbivorus is dark purple with dark patterns, mostly spots, but also some ventral strips or stripes. They prefer plants, but can get a little value from meat too, although they appear to be pretty peaceful. Despite living in both of the extreme environments, their ideal temperature is pretty average, so they'll be suffering no matter whether they stay in the heat or in the cold. Nevertheless, as we'll see, this species becomes the common ancestor of every other species to evolve for the next 100+ hours, the root of a new tree of life. Let's skip ahead and check in at the 24-hour mark. Well, there's one species here, in the same place as Dinetus herbivorus was, but these seem different. They're bigger, much faster, and dark green. They're called Rhitostus fuscus? What happened to our Dinetus herbivorus friends? Let's take a look at the experimental taxonomy or tree of life view and find out. Here we can see that Dinetus herbivorus evolved into 2 new subspecies, which then diversified into new genuses of their own. Many generations have lived and died, eventually evolving into the ancestor of our Rhitostus fuscus friends, Bandotis coccineus rhitosti. Rhitostus fuscus doesn't appear on the tree yet, since they haven't evolved into any significant new species, but we can tell from the names that the Rhitostus genus came from the Rhitosti subspecies. Let's see what happens next. 12 hours later, we can see some diversification and speciation beginning. A single genus has split its subspecies across the map. Chirus rapidus occupies the eastern extreme habitats, while Chirus fulvus swims the mild western waters. Physically, Chirus rapidus is of course very fast, though not as strong as Chirus fulvus. They're also notably bigger than Chirus fulvus. In terms of ideal temperature, Chirus rapidus is better adapted to heat, which allows them to forage for nuts in the steamy jungle of weeds to the north. Chirus fulvus, in their milder environment, has fewer standout features, but both species have a dark ventral stripe or mask, which makes them harder to see in open water, but more obvious near weeds. Chirus fulvus is brown, while their big cousins Chirus rapidus are green. Curiously, it looks like one small subspecies of Chirus fulvus has colonized the east, and they happen to have turned green just like their cousins. Let's skip ahead just a bit. An hour or so later, things look more or less the same, although more diversity is appearing in the west. This isn't a big level, so we need some artificial barriers to really split up environments. In order to spice things up, I've sealed the opening between east and west, so we should see some real divergence going forward. Note the genuses currently in the simulation. Daracpus rapidus on the right, and on the left, Rattus fuscus, Sanctus zebratus, and Tecbus rapidus. I also reset the fruit value and respawn settings to default. They were goosed a little to help our newly evolved critters get started, so there will be a little more pressure to evolve ways to keep fed. I'll also reduce the frequency of brain mutations. With a high mutation rate, the only stable behaviors are very basic. Brains change too much between generations for evolutionary pressure to work on such a complex system. With a brain mutation rate of 3.5%, children will behave more like their parents, and that means successful brain structures will be able to persist through time. Day 1, Hour 15. Let's take a look at the taxonomy view. There at the top are our unfortunate Dicbicudubnus rapidus. No ancestors. So sad. Further down in time, we see the beginning of our tree of life, Dinetus herbivorus. A few twists and turns later, Rhitostus fuscus. And near the bottom, we see the branching into Chirus rapidus and Chirus fulvus. But it looks like the branch started by Chirus fulvus is dead. All the nodes appearing at the bottom of the tree are from Chirus rapidus. This tends to happen over and over. When a new species evolves that's more successful, they take over so quickly that nobody else has a chance to keep up. Let's look ahead to the beginning of Day 2. The critters on the left, they evolved from Betatobatus herbivorus tecbi, so let's call them Tecbians, have gotten significantly smaller and faster. Meanwhile, the descendants of Betatobatus rapidus Daracbi, or Daracbians, have stayed big and slowed down. The Daracbians are all blue-green, while there's a lot of diversity among Tecbians. Dark reds, purples, greens, and black. If we filter the taxonomy view by these original ancestors, we can observe that the Dyrachbian branch has a lot less forking than the Techbian side. Living in a harsher environment, it's harder for them to evolve new diversifications that don't immediately die off. We can tag these lineages so that later on we can not only quick filter the tree, but click on individual critters and see which tags they've inherited. Let's skip ahead some more. At halfway through day 2, a total transformation. The Dyrachbians, isolated away from competition or predation and with access to a steady supply of low-value nutrition from the frozen food dispensers, have degenerated into prolific bottom feeders. Minimal strength and speed, tiny bodies, but perfectly adapted for the cold. They simply cluster around the feeders, steering weakly toward food when they spot it. Meanwhile, the Techbians are big, fast, and strong, and while they are still primarily herbivores, we can observe them using the biting behavior they evolved for cracking nuts opportunistically when they bump by chance into each other. At the 3-day mark, I took down the wall between the east and west along the bottom and the center. Let's see what happens when these two divergent branches of the evolutionary tree have a reunion. An hour or two afterward, there are a lot of species and a lot of unfamiliar names, but we can use the generation view to tell Techbians from Dyrachbians. Although they've been small for a while, Dyrachbians were originally even bigger than the biggest Techbians, and that means long maturing times. As a result, even today, there's a big gap in numerical generations between the two branches. There is some interchange along the dividing line. Purple highlighted Dyrachbians colonizing the west, and big circling Techbians coming in along the bottom. If we look at their diets, we can see that the Techbians who've set up shop in the east are omnivores. They've been eating the Techbians. Well, they're easy prey, so tiny, slow, and weak, and there's no better source of protein than meat. There was an empty niche, so the Techbians filled it. That's evolution in action. This balance remains unchanged for a long time, until I interfere. Day 4, halfway through hour 10, I resealed the southern wall and opened up the north. I removed 2 of the 5 food dispensers in the frozen southeast, and I also strew some more weeds across the northwest. Now there's a gradient from the mild west to the overheated north. And just half an hour later, Techbians have completely wiped out the Dyrachbians. Their entire lobe of that tree of life is now a dead end. The expansion of viable territory available to the Techbians may have given them the numbers to outcompete their rivals, or they may have simply hunted the slow, fragile creatures out of existence. At day 4, hour 18, we can observe another major division. The Techbians have diverged along temperature lines. There are cool water Redorians and warm water Bantebians. Let's add these tags to the taxonomy tree and remove the Dyrachbian tag, since they are extinct. At the start of day 5, the Bantebians are averaging slightly larger and investing in higher speed to help move their bulk through the weeds, which slow them down more the bigger they grow. But a few hours from now, I'm going to unseal the bottom half of the map, offering cold comfy Redorians access to fresh feeding grounds without having to cross the narrow passage through the center or brave the hellish northern waters. And halfway through day 5, the Bantebian line is going the way of the dinosaur. The Redorians, on the other hand, have diversified, filling up empty niches and picking up new physical traits. Looking at the population statistic graphs, we can see strength, speed, size, even parenting type have a wide range of values. Not long after this, I put the missing food dispensers back in, just to be nice. And that brings us to the 6-day mark. Our critters have diversified. They have a wide range of physical traits from strength and speed to temperature adaptation, parental commitment, and size. Many of them are omnivorous, able to digest both plants and meat. If we watch the scent overlay, we can even see one species, Barocinus extravagans, appears to be emitting musk on a regular basis. I wonder what triggers it, and what, if anything, they do when they smell it. On the Tree of Life, we can see what might be the beginnings of another major split between Rorosenians and Todidians, although the cool water Rorosenians are down to just one genus, so anything could happen. The Rorosenians are these little masked green guys, while the dominant Todidians are universally adapted for camouflage among the weeds, red with orange stripes which makes them virtually impossible to distinguish from the plants. That wraps up 5 days of evolution in Neuraquarium. There were some bumps along the way, but our critters have adapted and thrived. I hope you enjoyed coming on this evolutionary journey with me. If you want to try evolving neural net critters of your own, you can download Neuraquarium on itch.io. Thanks for watching!